William Nylander scores his 40th goal of the season as the Maple Leafs end the regular season with a win in New York. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net's Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Madison Square Garden, where the Leafs beat the Rangers 3-2 to end their regular season. They, of course, are looking ahead now to game number 1 of the first round series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. We will definitely spend a lot of time talking about that series, but still some housekeeping to do here, Dave, in game number 82. A lot of milestones were definitely of focus coming into this one. William Nylander, as I mentioned, scoring his 40th. We'll hear from him. But unfortunately for Mitch Marner, missing out on the 100th point of his season, definitely wasn't for a lack of trying. He tried a lot in this one, and the Leafs had a ton of opportunities when he was on the ice, but were not able to solve Yaroslav Halak. And then at the end there, on the penalty kill with the net empty, Marner had like 4 chances to throw it towards the net, and each time it was stopped by the New York Rangers defenders. They were pretty clear and I would say aware of what was going on as well. But before we get to Nylander, let's start with Marner and your thoughts on his game.
Yeah, it was interesting to see. They certainly were trying to get that 100 point for him, especially when he came on in that situation. With the stakes being so low, I don't think they would have tried in any other situation where he came on for the PK and then was kind of just off for like about 30 seconds before coming right back into that in that situation. I don't think they try that if there was something at stakes, because even though he had those chances, you saw that Philip Heel disallowed goals that could have changed the game, that could have forced overtime. In hindsight, if you're a Leafs fan or you're a Marner fan, you kind of hope that goal would have stood, because then that would have given overtime and Marner another opportunity to get that 100 points in a meaningless game for Toronto. What's funny about that is I was just curious to see if Toronto would even challenge that situation, but when it's so late in the game, the league challenges it. So it didn't even matter at that point. It wasn't even in Toronto's hands. Such of a weird circumstance. That is a game of very low stakes for Toronto. It had some meaning for the Rangers, who are still jockeying for position. And now we know they'll play the New Jersey Devils. And I guess it's not the Lincoln Tunnel Series anymore because they're not at the Meadowlands. They're a little further inland New Jersey. It's called the Penn Station Series. But other than that, Mitch Marner kind of going into that, really wanting the 100 points, kind of cheated in that previous game where we thought he had 4. They took 1 away from Austin Matthews' 41st goal. So kind of a weird situation that he doesn't get it, but 99 is still a pretty impressive number. And he has many, many more years to get 100. I'm certain he will, if not next year and years after that.
Yeah, and of course it's difficult in these last, few games where he gets sat in a couple of them because they're trying to, manage his load. The guy's played a ton of hockey in all different kinds of situations this year, and they've got bigger fish to fry when it comes to the playoffs. So, it totally makes sense what they were doing there. We know he, if it was up to him, he'd play every single game. But, you think back to all the different moments this year where he probably should have gotten that extra point. You mentioned the Montreal game, of course, where that assist was taken away, but I think of the one that really stands out is the header pass that ultimately did not end up in a goal by Calle Jarnkrok because it was an incredible save in that game. So it's just so many moments throughout the year where could have been easily 100 points for Mitch Marner, and like you said, he's going to get it at some point in his career, and it's going to happen. It's pretty obvious that the guy's incredibly talented, and for him to do that this year, getting so close is tough. But as we said, bigger fish to fry with the playoffs ahead. But we did see a couple of milestones. In fact, William Nylander picking up his 40th goal of the season, and that was pretty obvious very early on that Nylander was in search of that goal, shooting from every possible angle. I was joking that he was probably going to end up with like 15 shots in this game. I mean, it felt like 15 shot attempts at the very least. I did not get a chance to see the final numbers for Nylander, but he was all over the place tonight. Looking for that 40th, finally got it on a nifty move where he caught the puck in midair on a pass from Ryan O'Reilly and was able to beat Yaroslav Halak after knocking the puck down. But let's hear from the Maple Leafs forward on accomplishing the 40-goal milestone.
Yeah, obviously it's nice to get 40. I mean, after the breakaway in the first period was a little rattling, but great play by Factor, and yeah, it's nice to get 40.
How much was it on your mind? There seemed to be quite a few shot attempts coming off your stick there.
Yeah, I was shooting it maybe a little bit more than usual today just to try to get that 40 goal. So, yeah, it was nice that it came out in the end.
Yeah, and as I look at it now, William Nylander tonight finishing with 12 shot attempts, so it wasn't that far off. But,
Right.
I think just overall, Dave, we've been kind of talking about it with regards to Nylander, that he seems to have, found his footing of late, and he's skating again. I know he was responsible partly for the first goal that the Rangers scored on a pretty, poor pass back to Justin Hall in the Maple Leaf zone. Just really a careless play. I mean, at this point of the season, it's, a nothing game, as you said, but it's those sort of little things that I'm sure Sheldon Keefe is still trying to, get his team to work on. And Nylander, I'm sure, knows better than that. But, it's just a nice milestone on the whole season for Nylander, because when you look at the totality of it all, I mean, it was an incredible, not breakout year, because he was great last year as well, but it felt like this year he definitely took another step.
Yeah, he definitely did. And for about 80 to 85% of the season, from start to about that mid-March portion, he was dominant. I mean, that was a big part of it, right? Then the standard of play started to drop in that early to mid-March, and, he kind of moved down to the third line, and Sheldon Keefe was just kind of making sure that he had to give the gentle reminder, but he didn't need to do anything like that in previous years, like bench him or anything like that. It was pretty clear that William Nylander had the awareness to know that his standards play wasn't up to snuff, and then going back to playing with John Tavares and being able to kind of bring that standard back, I think was just kind of bringing it full circle. Now, what I am curious to see is how he handles being on PP2 in the playoffs going forward, if that's what they stick with. As you know, they had Matthew Knies replace John Tavares, who's back home for personal reasons, but that was a placeholding spot for Knies on PP1, and Nylander back on PP2. He didn't seem particularly thrilled about that move. Certainly someone who likes to generate offense, and we know that PP1 gets about 90% of the time at the power play. Unless PP1 is struggling, they usually stick with it. And so I'm very curious to see how long that sticks and how William Nylander kind of goes along with it, because in the playoffs, they're going to need some of that jam. Ryan O'Reilly brings in a little bit of a different standard to it, but then maybe that gives them some flexibility to go with PP2 a little bit more. We'll see.
Yeah, I still think at the end of the day, he's going to find his way back up there. I think the Leafs have been just, trying a few different things. And, Nylander was going through a stretch where maybe he wasn't at his best. So maybe it was a little bit of a punishment for him as well to be dropped down to power play 2. But it just feels like this, power play is at its optimal when he's on that first unit with Tavares, Marner, Matthews, and of course, Morgan Rielly on the points. But a special moment tonight for William Nylander finally getting that 40th goal. Meanwhile, there was another milestone in this one, and it wasn't talked about. I didn't even know until the broadcast mentioned it, but Noel Acciari scoring tonight, his 100th points in the National Hockey League. A guy, of course, not known for goal scoring necessarily, more for his physicality. He spoke post-game about how this game played out in game number 82 when it comes to the rough and tumble stuff.
You still want to play the game, and you want to finish the checks when they're there, but at the same time, it's, you don't want to hurt yourself by maybe trying to go out of your way and throwing a big hit. And but it's still hockey. You still got to play the game, and both teams want to win still.
And that was definitely something, Dave, I was going to keep an eye on heading into this one. Not, like the teams would show up and say, hey, no hitting tonight in this one. There was still some physicality. I mean, I saw Luke Schenn throw the body around. It's kind of ingrained in him. He kind of does that stuff. But, we didn't see any huge body checks or anybody trying to, lay the lumber on guys. I mean, it was not a preseason game, but it was a bit of a casual skate out there. Both of these teams headed to the playoffs, and, clearly sort of a gentleman's agreement, if you will, that there was going to be, nothing untoward to make sure both of these teams got into the playoffs healthy.
Yeah, this was very much a low event game. When you look at the numbers combined, it's 14 hits for Toronto, 10 for the Rangers. Early on, I did see one hit that I thought, okay, maybe this is the plan, but things will kind of flare up. There wasn't a single scrum. That was the biggest takeaway for me. Like there wasn't any extracurricular activities of any kind. Like you compare this to what you saw in Tampa, where it seemed like almost every stoppage, someone had something to say about the play, no matter how innocuous it was. This time it was like, I don't want to say it was an all-star game level of play, but it really was just kind of like a scrimmage with some hitting. There was no extracurricular activities whatsoever. It's almost like they kind of got together and decided, hey, let's have a nice, clean game. Both of us are going in different paths in the playoffs and want to kind of get out of this. And there's really no hostilities between Toronto and the Rangers. It really is it was perfectly set for Toronto that they had a non-divisional rival, a team that, plays more of a rush game and is also full of skill like Toronto is, that there wasn't really going to be any jarring or like anything like that. It was just pretty much just go play hockey, demonstrate some skill, complete your checks, but don't go out there and try to injure anyone and kind of send any sort of message. There were no messages delivered on this night.
Yeah, Jacob Trouba was very tame in this one.
Right.
He, of course, known for his open ice hits. And tonight it was just sort of like, don't want to be doing any of that kind of stuff. And then maybe put some of our own guys at risk. But overall, you're happy. That was priority number one coming into this one, that the Maple Leafs would be able to leave unscathed, as Sheldon Keefe put it earlier today in the media availability. So he tempted the hockey gods, but luckily for him and the Maple Leafs tonight, they came away 100% healthy. I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few moments when, guys go down or fall a little bit awkwardly and you're like, oh, geez, like, please get up. Like, I think I remember Ryan O'Reilly. Mitch Marner fell down at one point, kind of toe-picked and fell on his back. And there was another moment. I remember, I think it was in the third period, late in the third, Ryan O'Reilly was, skating towards the half wall and he kind of slipped and went awkwardly into the boards. And I thought, oh man, like that was pretty close to potentially being something bad. But, you look around the league and I see a game where, the Boston Bruins are playing their, top three guys as far as Marchand, Bergeron, and Pasternak. And, look at some of these other teams that are headed to the playoffs. I mean, the New Jersey Devils, they're playing all their guys. And same with Carolina, Florida, right? Like nobody was necessarily sitting a ton of their stars with these final games of the regular season, because at the end of the day, you still need to get ready for the postseason, because there is a bit of a layoff here, at least 3 days possibly for some of these teams. And same with Tampa Bay. They didn't sit anyone either. As Kucherov, Point, Stamkos were all out there. I know Hedman didn't play tonight, but still, it's a situation where you look around the league and, teams are still playing their stars, getting ready for the playoffs. I know the Leafs sat some guys here tonight with John Tavares, and we expect him to be ready for game number one. But overall, everything went well, and you're just happy that game 82 is in the books if you're Sheldon.
Yeah, it's really funny. We were talking about game 82, and I saw a tweet from the Boston Bruins at 8:06 that said Patrice Bergeron, upper body precautionary, will not return to tonight's game. And so,
oh, I missed that.
Yeah, but like it was precautionary apparently. And so, of course, the Bruins tweet that, and everyone starts to fear the worst. But it sounds like, based on the reports there, that it was something very minor and nothing that like was actually injury related. They were just like, okay, that's it. That's it for you. We're not putting you into this game any longer. These are those type of games where you kind of start to worry about, are you going to have any of that risk? It's funny. You mentioned the ice here in the slips. We were kind of wondering if it's just the MSG ice, because we see the Leafs do that whenever they come here in every year. This is one of the unique arenas where only in New York and Boston, I believe, are the only two NHL arenas where the ice is not on the ground floor of the structure. So at MSG, the ice is on, like, we're on the 5th level right now. Like below that, there's a theater and there's a couple of other floors, and then there's Penn Station directly below us. And in Boston, it's on the 3rd floor, I believe. Other than that, every other ice surface is kind of on the ground floor. And given how multi-use this building is, you wonder just how good that ice quality is. And so it seems like Marner, who's really hard on his edges a lot, kind of is prone to these slips every now and then, but there were definitely some falls where you're just kind of like, okay, let that be a natural thing and not something that just happened, right? Like if you're a Leaf fan, you're looking at any of these, you're just kind of cringing anytime anyone falls awkwardly because it's game 82 and because you know that there isn't a lot to this game.
All right, so we're going to spend a lot of time previewing game number 1 and the first round series against the Tampa Bay Lightning, but kind of wrapping up the bow here for the regular season. The Leafs finished 50, 21, and 11. Sheldon Keefe becoming the second Leaf coach after Mike Babcock with back-to-back 100-point seasons. So an impressive run that Sheldon Keefe continues to be on here. When you look back at all these 82, Dave, I mean, you were there for every single one. How would you wrap up this regular season and kind of put it into perspective?
Well, consistent. That was the number one thing. You know, it really mirrored what they did last year. Last year they had a record-breaking season with 115 points and 54 wins. And like last year, they also struggled out of the gate. And then you kind of wondered if they were going to be able to dig out of it. But even in those struggles, they didn't lose back-to-back games in regulation very often. I believe it only happened twice all season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so consistency is number one. But the bigger takeaway is the Leafs totally revamped the depth of the squad for the last 2 months of the year. And the most important thing out of all of that is, although it was bumpy at times, they remained consistent even with the new guys there. So they were able to add some of the things that they were missing from physicality, aggression. And then to me, what they did better this year than last year was establishing a proper B game, like a game where you don't have to shoot the lights out, win the expected goals battle, win the Corsi, and do all those things that the Leafs had always been pretty good at. But they had to do other things and find other ways to win games. There were many times, especially late in the season, where Ilya Samsonov against really good teams outright stole them wins. And you needed that. You didn't have any sense of that from the goaltending last year in that tandem of Jack Campbell and Peter Mrazek. So you look at those differences in the new personnel. That's what should give Leaf fans some confidence that this year might be different, and why you should feel pretty good about Toronto's prospects, especially given where Tampa is right.
Yeah, you would think so. Tampa Bay has been struggling the last couple of months. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And, you know, you look at the game the other night, it was really hard to get a read on it because there were players missing for the Maple Leafs. Ilya Samsonov was not starting there. But, you know, we know both these teams are going to play each other very hard. But like you said, you look at this whole season, and aside from the first little bit, it was consistent. And it's crazy to think that we began this journey all the way back in October here on Rink Wide Toronto with the regular season games. And of course, we did it during the preseason as well. But it is kind of wild to look back and think about, you know, some of the roller coaster rides that we were on at times, thinking about that West Coast road trip where everyone was calling for Sheldon Keefe's head and calling for Kyle Dubas's head, and everyone's got to go. And, you know, are the Leafs destined to miss the playoffs? Is this, you know, going to be one of those nightmare seasons? And then they have a November to remember, and then they were really strong in December as well, and pretty much have been that way, aside from a few speed wobbles here with the goaltending and maybe some, you know, losses to some bad teams. But overall, you know, 82 games, by the end of it, you're generally going to know if you're a good team or not. And it's pretty clear that the Maple Leafs are one of the better teams in the National Hockey League. But coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we will definitely spend some time talking about that first round series against Tampa Bay. Who might be in, who might be out? Matthew Knies with another impressive performance. We'll definitely talk a lot about him. Joseph Woll as well. Are the Leafs going to go 11-7? We'll get into all of that coming up here on Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game. You're listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Madison Square Garden. The Leafs wrapping up their regular season with a 3-2 win over the New York Rangers. But with that now in the rearview mirror, it is time to look ahead to round one against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it is time for the Bodog line of the day. And if you look at really any sports book, Dave, including Bodog, the Leafs are favored to win this series for the second time in 2 years. They were, slight favorites over the Lightning a year ago. This season, they seem to be a bit heavier of a favorite when you look at the sports books based on where the Leafs are, what they've been doing, and based off of, the struggles that Tampa has had in the last couple of months here. But it's always so hard to pick against a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning that have that pedigree, of course. And at the end of the day, it's hockey. Anything can happen. It is a piece of rubber bouncing on the ice, being whacked around by plastic sticks at the end of it. I mean, you just have to look on any given nights. Maybe, take away this night where teams are wrapping up their regular seasons, where you've got, bad teams beating good teams. But I think of, even just a few nights ago when the Pittsburgh Penguins, with guys like Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, had to win it, had to perform, and they lose to the Chicago Blackhawks of all teams. And, they outshot the Blackhawks by a lot, but at the end of the day, the Hawks scored enough goals and won that game. So, as we know, anything can happen on any given night. But I just think when you look at everything with these two teams, the Maple Leafs and the Lightning, this is the year, I think, the Leafs are finally equipped to go beyond the first round. Is that a guarantee? Do I think it's going to happen? No, but I think if you take away all the leafiness and all the curse of 67 and all of that stuff, this is probably one of the more complete Maple Leafs teams that we've seen in this, Matthews, Marner, Nylander era.
I would agree. And I really like the additions that they made in the second half of the season. Like, I think that there was this clear identification that they really had to kind of add guys that change the complexion of the team in terms of when they have to adjust to that B game, like I mentioned in that first segment. I always felt that the Leafs didn't really have that. If their stars weren't scoring or driving plays, they didn't have the depth to have the unsung hero make the big play or the big hit, or just the standard of play that changes in the off season that can kind of change the complexion of a series. And so it's funny because when I look back on the Toronto Tampa series last year, games 1 through 6 were so penalty filled that it was actually perfectly set up for the Maple Leafs to win that series. But what happened was in game 6, while they were leading that series 3-2, Austin Matthews hits a post in overtime, some bad calls in that third period with the 5-on-3, and they were forced to a game 7. And game 7 really, in my mind, was the first and only game of that series where it felt like an old school playoff game. Like games that you've seen the Leafs play now late in the season where it's tight, not a lot of room for space, and you need the third or fourth line guys to kind of really step up and make a big play. And I point to that game against the Boston Bruins on the road as an excellent example of that. Even against Carolina, even though they lost that, it was a goaltending that kind of lost in that game with Matt Murray in there, but they played really tight defensively against one of the better teams in the NHL. And you had to like that element of it. So they have the weapons for when it's a shooting gallery out there, when there's a lot of penalties, but now they have the depth and they have the hitting and the momentum changers necessary for when the game calls for that in the playoffs. It calls for that more often than it does in the regular season. And you have better goaltending. I think it's with not even a doubt at this point that Ilya Samsonov gives them a better standard of goaltending than what Jack Campbell did, than what Peter Mrazek did. Joseph Woll has ended his season pretty well, and that's good if they have to go to that spot. But I think the goaltending could still be the difference here in Tampa's favor, but Toronto has really shored up everything else that there's really no reason for them to drop this series.
No, you would think that, as we said, they are better equipped to win it this year. They have a lot more depth in a lot of different areas, and same with the goaltending. I mean, if it gets to that point where, Joseph Wall has to be your backup, you feel a lot better about that than you do Peter Mrazek a year ago, even though Jack Campbell was able to play in all of those games last year for the Maple Leafs in that first-round loss against Tampa Bay. So, of course, we'll get to the blue line in a second here as we try to narrow down who we may think will feature into game number 1. But right now, Dave, I think everyone's question with regards to the Maple Leafs lineup is Matthew Knies going to get in there for game number 1. I have been very steadfast, and I think you have as well, that we're not necessarily sure who would come out of the lineup for the Maple Leafs to put Matthew Knies in there. But another game where he just continues to do good things. Was it perfect? Of course not. He's a rookie, and it's hard to expect perfection from a guy playing in his third NHL game against a playoff team at Madison Square Garden. Like, that's a lot to ask of him. But, had a couple of strong drives to the nets. He was using his big body down low, moving the puck around. I don't want to change my stance because I don't want to sound wishy-washy. I will say still, even if it is the wrong answer, that I don't think he'll get in there for game number 1. But I think the momentum is starting to build, seemingly, that he might actually be in there on game 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's going to happen, at least for game 1. But I do think at some point he will emerge in the series. I think right now he's the 13th forward. Like, that's pretty much where he is. I think he's shown enough to be that guy who can kind of slot in if there's an injury or underperformance from someone else and they feel they need a bit of a different look. Maybe at home as opposed to on the road, where he could kind of get caught on line changes or things like that. It's different. It's a very different animal in the postseason. We know that. 3 games, it's difficult. But at the same time, Knies has played some pretty pressure-packed games in the last little bit. So that helps. And in these 3 games here on this road trip, he's kind of looked pretty good. So, especially when they threw him into a game earlier than they expected to. Remember, he was supposed to kind of go in for Tampa and not necessarily play in that game against the Panthers. So, for him to be not rushed along, but to play more than expected and to do a pretty good job of it, I think cements him into that number 13 forward spot for game 1. And then if something happens or there's an injury or there's underperformance, I think they try him and see where he's at and then give him a go and see if he can handle it and minimize the mistakes. The only thing you have to be worried about with Knies is the inexperience. At times you do see him try some things where, it does lead to a grade A chance the other way, but it's not unlike any other player's done. So, it's all part of the experience, but I think right now, rationally, he's the number 13 forward right now.
All right, well, let's hear from the Maple Leafs rookie who says he is definitely getting more comfortable in the NHL.
A lot, it gets me a lot more familiar with the guys in this locker room, how things are behind the scenes during the warm-ups, and, just getting acclimated with the atmosphere in an NHL, arena. So, it's been huge for my confidence, and I'm just excited to keep moving forward.
Meanwhile, head coach Sheldon Keefe was asked his thoughts on Knies and if he is ready for the postseason.
Yeah, I would feel very comfortable. The playoffs still remains to be seen, right? That's a different animal. But as far as the only test you could have is these 3 games for him, and he certainly fit in. It's 3 very good teams, 3 playoff teams that he's played against. That Florida team that was desperate, the same team we're going to play in Tampa, and then here tonight. So, 3 games, I really looked like he belonged to me.
Yeah, he's definitely, looking more and more comfortable, as he said, and Sheldon Keefe as well. I think some people are also reading into the fact that he's been put in more prominent spots here, Dave. PP1 tonight, and I think he even got a shift with Matthews and Marner at one point and almost led to a goal. Marner with a nice pass to Knies, and then Knies over to Matthews on a toe drag.
That happened in his first game, too.
wasn't able to put it home. Yeah, so he's found his way alongside some of the more prominent players on this team, and I don't know if it's just the situation or if Sheldon Keefe is maybe trying to unintentionally tip his hand a little bit here, but he's giving him tests, right? Because that's what these 3 games were for, to see if Matthew Knies is ready for the playoffs, and I tend to agree with you. Like, if he's probably going to play at some point in this series. I think we'd all be surprised if he doesn't. The Leafs would, probably have to sweep Tampa Bay or something where, they just don't make any lineup changes because they keep on rolling. But I've just been pleasantly surprised, to be honest. Like, I really didn't know how his game would translate to the NHL level because everything I'd read is that, he's got size, he's got physicality, but the skating is a bit of an issue. And, it is at times, of course, he's not a burner by any means, but I think I have been, pleasantly surprised that, at the NHL level, guys are big. There's a lot of men that are playing in this league, and he's been able to withstand a lot of the physicality. And to be able to do that at the age of 20 can only lend to more positive things moving forward here. So, it's hard not to get excited about Matthew Knies. I think a lot of Leafs Nation is pretty pumped about what they've seen so far, and I imagine a large section of the fan base. If we put out a Twitter poll right now, is Matthew Knies in your Game 1 lineup? I think it's going to be overwhelmingly yes. With what he has shown so far in these 3 games.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, people were reading a lot into this game in particular, but this game is not the right way to kind of go read into it too far because it was the logical step to put Knies into that spot with John Tavares away for personal reasons. He was placeholding for Tavares very much in both power play and even strength situations. Tavares is normally in that spot if Knies isn't in there, and they don't really want to mess with what they're doing with PP2. So why would you adjust PP2? Instead, just have Knies in there on PP1. The other thing is, in those home games that we've been talking about, their lineup, they've been doing a lot of Tavares on the left wing with O'Reilly and Nylander, and that looks like a line that they'll at least start with the home games when they have the second change. And the matchups are in their favor. So I think for those reasons, if that's the case, where are you putting Knies at that point? Are you going to put him on a line with Achari and Kerfoot? Like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, you can insulate him, but that third line needs to be able to defend that first line. So I don't know, against Tampa in that type of situation, it might get a little bit exposed. Because that third line gets a lot of that relief assignment and has to be, that tight checking thing. And that's where the defensive element of his game could get a little bit exposed there. So I wouldn't want to read too much into this particular game, especially because of the lack of significance of what this game really was. But it was still good to see him in those spots if he needs to be thrust into position because of an injury or performance, like I mentioned. You have to feel good that he's going to come in at some point in this series. I'm not quite sure if Game 1 is the right call for it. I think you have to go with some of the other guys, and I think Knies can learn a lot from watching that Game 1 up close and the tendencies and what they do in the pressure situations for him to be able to kind of make that smooth transition should he get one of the later games.
Yep, that all makes sense for sure. Just wait until next week when it's completely flipped on its head. And here's Matthew Knies starting game number 1 for the Maple Leafs against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But when it comes to the roster construction, a couple of weeks ago, I was pretty set that I thought 11-7 was going to be the way things would go. And it very well could be because of the cap situation and a lot of different things. It, hasn't necessarily been as consistent as it was a couple of weeks ago, Dave. I'm still leaning towards the fact that it's probably going to be 12-6. So I will, go back on my previous prediction for 11-7. But, as it stands right now, I think, we just talked about the forwards. We have a pretty good sense of who's going to be in there. When you look at the back end, there's maybe one spot up for grabs. And is it going to be Luke Schenn? Is it going to be Timothy Liljegren? I think, Liljegren's been pretty strong of late. I mean, we really haven't been talking enough about him, and largely because he hasn't been making, the big mistakes that he was a couple couple of weeks ago. I'm still of the camp that I think Luke Schen's going to be in there for game number 1 because of, the physicality elements. We saw him the other night stand up for himself and the team against Pat Maroon. And, not necessarily that there's going to be fisticuffs or fights in game number 1, but I think that, really sent a message to the Maple Leafs and to Tampa Bay, of course, that, when Schen's in there, that there's certain things that just aren't going to happen with Tampa Bay. But where do you land on who is going to be in there as far as the blue line goes?
Yeah, I had Luke Schenn as in the top 6 to start, or the 6th defenseman that would start in game 1. And then when that game against Tampa happened, he certainly punched that ticket, like as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the way he was able to respond and show no intimidation with someone like Pat Maroon, who really had the Leafs number in that series. Same with Corey Perry. I mean, Bunting was the one who mixed it up with Corey Perry, but just Luke Schenn's presence in there, I think, is certainly going to help. His familiarity with the Lightning is going to help. And I think a lot of that was why the Leafs decided, even though they made all these other acquisitions, to get Schenn, to make sure that they just had another body that they can throw in there that can really kind of help with that pushback. Because at that point, they knew for so long they were playing against Tampa. It almost seemed like an opponent engineered move when they did that, considering everyone else they already had on their roster. So you look at that, he has that, ability there. And I do think it will be 12-6. And the only reason I say 12-6 right now is because I don't know if Timothy Liljegren has done enough to force his way on the roster compared to the Knies and other forward decisions. Zach Aston-Reese has had a really good April, and that fourth line of Aston-Reese, Kampf, and Lafferty is so locked in right now because of how well they played against Boston in that example that I talked about in the last segment. So you take those two things and Erik Gustafsson getting hurt and that experiment that we wanted to see there. I think Gustafsson would have been a great 7 in that regard. And it's too bad he got hurt with an upper body injury, although it doesn't seem too serious. I did see him here in the halls. But I think for all those reasons, the 6 defensemen you've seen the last couple of games are the 6 defensemen that are going to be in the game 1 of the opening lineup. I'm almost certain of.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's just makes too much sense right now. And I can't believe I'm saying that because earlier this year I was anti-Luke Schenn. I thought, man, this team does not, need that. And I've been pleasantly surprised. Like there are still some moments where he struggles to get the puck out of his own end or even make a pass, DDD pass. And that's never going to be a strength. So, it's not fair to him to be like, why can't you be more like Morgan Riley in some of these moments? Because Luke Schenn just does not play that type of game, but it's going to be important because Tampa Bay knows that, of course, and they're going to be picking on him in a lot of different situations, but he just brings something that this Leafs blue line does not have, and it's going to be interesting to see how things go with him back there in potentially game number 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So the backup goalie spot, again, Joseph Woll with another strong performance here. And, I tweeted it out during the game when he was making some of these big saves that, the evidence is starting to build that he's going to be a guy. Like I know it's just a small sample size when you look at his numbers and we see it all the time, right? Goalies that come out of nowhere, not come out of nowhere, but, goalies getting their first real crack playing behind a really good hockey team. They put up, really good numbers and you go, man, this guy's going to be a stud. And then they, end up going somewhere else where maybe the team isn't as good or the team in front of them is not as good. And, the numbers dip. We do know that, teams definitely do have an impact on goaltending numbers at times, but, just the eye test and even some of the, advanced statistics when it comes to the goaltending position, are definitely leaning in favor of Joseph Woll potentially being a dude, and that's massive for the Maple Leafs, as we touched on a lot here. But would you be surprised at all if he is the backup for game number 1, or do you think it's kind of all but a certainty at this moment with the status of Matt Murray seemingly up?
Yeah, well, Matt Murray hasn't been on the ice at all, despite the craziness that was the ATOs, them trying to get Knies in and saying that he was able to back up, or they thought that he could back up. Matt Murray is, I don't think, going to be an option at all for at least game 1 or game 2, even in a backup position. I wouldn't be surprised if he is back on the ice, just trying to kind of get ready. It wouldn't be unlike Peter Mrazek, who was also hurt at the end of the regular season, but was starting to skate on the taxi squad and trying to get himself ready just in case the Leafs did go deeper and there was an off chance that they were going to need him. So that wouldn't surprise me. But your description of Joseph Woll being a dude, well, yeah, I mean, like he's been performing really well. I think Ilya Samsonov has been probably the most consistent at the NHL level in terms of the guy you feel most comfortable with going for the first couple of games. And he's got that playoff experience that he can learn from last year. You know, that's still going to be the question mark is, you know, Samsonov did not have a great playoffs last year, and these games have more significance, and you really start to know what a goaltender's made of when you put him in these pressure pack situations and see how they can stay in the moment. So you start Samsonov, but if Joseph Woll somehow does get thrust in and all the meditation, all the focus and all those things happen where he's really able to rise to the occasion, then who knows? You have yourself another competition at your hands. But Samsonov has performed very well this year. It was why we were talking about the Jennings Trophy at one point for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Oh,
remember that?
I do remember that. I almost feel embarrassed.
The only reason I bring that up is because, like, literally the moment the Boston Bruins season ended, they sent out an email that Swayman and Linus Ullmark got the Jennings. I'm like, I got to make sure to bring that up with my boy Rob for the pod. So we were talking about that at one point as the goaltending getting much better, and so Joseph Woll could be a part of that. But I think it's a big step for a guy who's under control for another year and will definitely be in that top two next year. There's no doubt on my mind.
In my defense, you know, there was a stretch where the Maple Leafs had both Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov rocking, save percentages over 920. Yep. So it wasn't as if, we were just speculating or, just kind of talking out of our rear ends. Like, there were numbers that were backing up that both of these guys were playing out of their minds. And we did also say at the time, it's unlikely that they're going to continue playing, at this clip. And, that ended up bearing out, unfortunately, for Matt Murray, and Samsonov came back to earth a little bit. But overall, the goaltending this year has been a plus for the Maple Leafs when you've got Samsonov and Woll, and even Matt Murray at times was very, very good. So it's been a positive experience, for the most part this year for the Maple Leafs, and definitely a big reason why they finished with 50 wins in the regular season. But you've got a tandem right now with Samsonov and Woll that you feel pretty good about. As for Woll, he says no matter what happens, he will be there to do what the team needs.
Yeah, whatever happens, I just try to do my best to stay ready and help whichever team I'm on. I'm very happy to be with this team right now, and it's been a crazy year, but I think it's been a really awesome year. So I've been happy with everything that's been happening.
Yeah, hard to be unhappy about the season that he's had, both at the
crazy
AHL
year, but awesome.
And the National Hockey League level.
Crazy year and awesome year, which is kind of sums up his breakout, right? Like, he started the year with injury, an injury that ended the season last year, which trickled into this year. And when you go through an injury that long, you really start to wonder if you're going to be able to get it back again. He was able to stay in the moment, be one of the best one of the best AHL goaltenders. And then when he got called up, there was just no drop in his game. It really has been quite the jump. That's why the Leafs feel he is the real deal and perhaps their goalie of the future.
Yeah, 11 games, and you've got a save percentage of .924. That's pretty good for your first 11 games in the National Hockey League. All right, getting back to the forwards here. As you mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Game 1 lineup and what Sheldon Keefe wants to do with last change. We have seen that Tavares, O'Reilly, and Nylander combination as the second line. You mentioned the fourth line as well with, Kampf, Aston Reese, and Lafferty. But what do you think happens with the third line? Is it simply Kerfoot along with Achari? Who's playing center there? I guess it would be Achari. We know that they've tried Kerfoot up the middle, of course, numerous times, and hasn't always worked out. But I'm kind of interested to see, because somebody's going to have to go out there and shut down the top line. Maybe it is Aston Reese, Kampf, and Lafferty. We know how much they trust Kampf, but that's kind of why I was hoping that Ryan O'Reilly would be dropped to 3C, even if it's at home games.
I think he will.
I just think we saw what he did in that game against Tampa Bay the other day, where he wasn't playing the top comp, but he was playing, the top six, of course. But, it's just a spot where if Nylander is out there with Tavares, him, and O'Reilly, like, I'm not sure if that's the shutdown line that you want. So that's why I'm thinking, we saw it before a couple of weeks ago. It was Kerfoot, O'Reilly, and Achari as sort of that shutdown trio. And I feel like maybe that's probably what we're going to see here in game number one.
So in game number one, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see O'Reilly up the middle with Tavares and Nylander. And then you're going to drop Yarncroke down to play on the right side with Kerfoot and Achari in the middle. And that will be their third line. That's what I think will happen. The Leafs have a lot of confidence in Yarncroke's ability to be a defender. It's why they got him. And so I think that they feel at home, when they have the second change, they can make subtle adjustments. And those would be the lines that they do. When it shifts to game 3 and they're on the road, that's where I think you see more of O'Reilly in that 3C, and you see Yarncroke, Tavares, Nylander, or maybe even Yarncroke, Matthews, Martyr with Bunting, Tavares, Nylander is a possibility, depending on how Bunting plays in all this. And then I think you see Kerfoot, O'Reilly, Achari is that third line. Like, that's what I really think. And then maybe Knies is in there as well, and perhaps he bumps out somebody. I don't know. That's of course 2 games after game 1, so we don't know. But it seemed like every time they were kind of mixing and matching things, they were trying. O'Reilly is the 3C on the road and is the 2C at home. And if there's anything we've known about Sheldon Keefe throughout his entire tenure as head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, is he doesn't keep things the same, and he puts things and changes things all the time, whether it's situational or whatever the case may be. And, whether you agree with it or not, I don't see this changing. I think that you're going to see O'Reilly flip between 3C and 2C a lot, depending on if he's available and if it's home or road, and how the Leafs are when it comes to lead in the series and how they're performing with what they do in games 1 and 2.
Well, that's why they went out and got Ryan O'Reilly for this type of situation, to be able to play in a lot of different situations. And as we've talked a lot about, his game, he's definitely started to ramp things up here of late since coming back from that finger injury, and has looked so good. I'm really excited to see how he's going to look in game 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, because this guy is a proven playoff performer. All right, let's wrap things up here, talking about our prediction for this series. I mean, let's lay it on the line. I think we kind of mentioned it before that the Leafs are definitely equipped to beat Tampa Bay. I don't know how many games, Dave, to be honest. I know people like to say the game and the result, but I just think the Leafs are going to get it done this year. I don't, want to jinx it or tease the hockey gods, because, look, the hockey gods haven't exactly been kind to Maple Leafs fans or people that cover the team anyways. So, I mean, tease them all you want. They're not exactly on your side to begin with. But I just think at the end of the day, this Tampa Bay team does have some flaws. I don't think they're as strong on the back end as they have been in years past. They've seen a lot of really strong players go out the door. There's always the X factor, of course, with Andrei Vasilevsky and how incredibly good he's been in the playoffs. But, goalies can get beat, and I don't care if you're Andrei Vasilevsky, if you're Patrick Waugh, if you're Dominik Hasek. I mean, it's not like you can't score on these guys. The Leafs scored a bunch of goals on him just the other night without some of their best players. So, you have to have confidence that he is beatable. They beat him a bunch last year in those, 6 games before getting, shut out pretty well, only scoring 1 goal. Should have been 2 on the Justin Hall pick play. But I just think overall the Leafs are a stronger team, and I think they get it done.
Yeah, I think they get it done too. Again, I caution they had a really high degree of being able to do it last year. My number one takeaway from that series when they lost game 7 was Julien Brisebois' reaction after winning. Like, after he went, he wasn't really celebrating like he was happy or confident about it. He kind of had this look where he was doing this massive exhale of relief. like that. They were just like, I don't know how we escaped this. Like that was Julian Breezeball's reaction, because I think they knew that that was such a slim chance of them winning Game 7, given the way the Leafs had played Tampa games 1 through 6. But again, remember Game 4, the Leafs got absolutely pasted because of Jack Campbell. Like they just didn't have the goaltending. They kind of got dug in, and that game was the one where it looked like the Leafs could take a stranglehold in it, and then it really planted a huge element of doubt in the Toronto Maple Leafs that their goaltending may not be up to snuff. And certainly Vasilevsky's best game was Game 7. And so that's always a factor. Remember, the whole narrative going into it was, is Vasilevsky human now? Maybe he's not that guy. Then when they needed him in Game 7, he certainly was that. So I do think the Leafs get it done this year, but I thought they'd get it done in the last couple of years. And I predicted that they would get it done in the last couple of years. I'm still predicting that they'll get it done this year. And I think a lot is riding on them to do it this year, because I don't know what kind of Armageddon we're going to see in terms of front office and roles and everything if it doesn't. That's going to be the big motivator.
At some point with Tampa Bay too, and the amount of playoff games that they've played, like that wears on you, right? Like it just physically wears on you, right? Like I know people have kind of been throwing that out there, but I think it's a real thing. I mean, they've just played so much more hockey than anyone else. They've put themselves through an incredible grind, and it's been worth it, of course, winning those back-to-back Stanley Cups and going to the Cup final last year. But, these guys are, pretty beat up, I would imagine, and going through another 82-game grind. It was pretty tough. They are still an incredibly good team, and I don't think the Leafs are looking past them by any means, nor should they. But the Leafs this year, I mean, there's a reason they finished 13 points ahead of Tampa Bay. They are a very, very good team, and we'll see how they fare coming up next week in Game 1. There is nothing official yet, Dave, but I guess the speculation is that Tuesday would be the opening game at Scotiabank Arena.
That's what even Sheldon Keefe said. They said that the word was it was leaning toward Tuesday, which is what I've heard. I heard Tuesday, Thursday, Game 1 and 2, and then it would look like Saturday, Monday for Games 3 and 4. But none of that is confirmed right now. I think the Raptors being out of the playoffs certainly helped Toronto in terms of the building availability, because I know that was a factor that was going to hold things up. And with the Raptors losing their play-in game, that hold is no longer in effect. And then the Lightning actually have the Friday and Sunday dates booked for concerts. So it would only be possible to do Saturday and Monday. So when you add up all those dots, that's what it looks like. It looks like it's going to be Tuesday and Thursday for Games 1 and 2, and then Saturday and Monday for Games 3 and 4.
All right. Well, let's see when it all comes out, and we'll definitely be talking a lot about game number 1 over here the next few days on Rink Wide Toronto. But it is the end of the regular season, and that means, as far as the regular season goes, it's the final Media Meal Musings. Can't wait for the playoffs, of course. But man, what a way to end it. New York, Madison Square Garden for your regular season finale for Media Meal Musings. How was it?
It was good. So I think I mentioned this earlier in the season, although I wasn't TikToking it back then. But the Rangers do what the Leafs used to do last year, which was vouchers. So you get a $25 voucher for concessions. They don't have like a actual media meal area. And so they actually took this idea from the Toronto Maple Leafs last year, who stopped doing it. Now, I've also heard that the Leafs are probably going to go back to vouchers for the playoffs because of how many media requests they have for the playoffs, which makes sense. So, today I went to a New York pizza concession stand here. I forget the name of it, but it was a pepperoni New York pizza slice with some hot honey sauce on it. So Nice. It was like a hot and honey pepperoni New York pizza. And it was about as good of a New York pizza as you could possibly have. I expect nothing less from MSG concessions. And then it was $25. I had to use the rest of it. So I got me a Pepsi Zero and a pack of Twizzlers. I don't usually eat a lot of Twizzlers, but I downed that huge pack of Twizzlers probably too fast. And so, Twizzlers are a Paul Hendrick favorite snack. Like he would usually bring his own snacks when he used to go to games. That and the Jolly Ranchers. He always had this big
yeah.
bag of Jolly Ranchers, and that's why we always called it Henny Treats instead of Henny Tweets, which is his Twitter handle. So we always wondered what's in the Henny Treats. So we might have to bring that back up for the off days when we have him on. But certainly, it was good. Good way to end it. This is my favorite road city. So for the end of the regular season, it was appropriate to be back at the Garden.
All right, so there you go. A little za to end things off for the regular season with Media Meal Musings. But we'll talk a lot about the food coming up for playoffs, of course, when Dave heads out on the road to Tampa Bay and Amalie Arena for the second straight postseason. That'll do it for this edition of Rink Wide Toronto. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod. You can follow us on Twitter, RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, at RobWong34, and you can get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. It's Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.